This is a self-study tutorial to help construct solid, integrated course-level student learning objectives. Now, let's consider the course you teach. Writing learning objectives involves looking at how your course contributes to a bigger picture. Consider how it contributes to what a student will be able to do out there in the community. How does your course contribute to the mission of the college, to the core competencies we seek to develop in our students? There are also some semantics to it. Objective statements look a certain way, and they're measurable, and so they require verbs in their statements. It's useful to use Bloom's taxonomy to determine what types of cognitive activity students engage in for your course, and then what verbs describe the behavior that demonstrates that activity. In doing this, you determine what students are able to do as a result of learning in your course. One way of thinking about this is to ask, what are students able to do out there that they learn in here? Finally, since a learning objective is measurable, it's important to determine the performance criteria for that objective. What is the difference between an excellent demonstration of learning and a sufficient demonstration of learning for each objective? What do the different levels of quality look like? This should be transparent to students. In fact, they should be able to define themselves what different levels of quality look like so that there are little, if any, questions about grade assignments. So to start off, let's consider how your course contributes to this mission. What kinds of ways does your course contribute to the rigorous scientific research of public health problems, innovative service, advancing public health knowledge, etc.? Are there things that this course specifically does to address diverse backgrounds or to help students develop creative partnerships? Does this course develop critical thinking skills or give students opportunities to demonstrate leadership? Does it have any component that would contribute to a student's ability to practice in the local, national, and international public health community? No course of course alone will achieve this mission, but each course in its own way helps to achieve it. So in thinking about how your course contributes to the mission, you may already be thinking in terms of how it develops certain competencies. Now these are the ones for the bachelor's degree. In some way, each course in the program contributes to developing one or more of these essential competencies that are required for success in future learning and in the field of public health. To which of these competencies and to which extent do you see your course contributing to their development in our students? Your course objectives also relate to other courses in the program, department or discipline. They may or may not be one of a sequence of courses, but each course relates to others in the program in some way. There's some common thread throughout that is connected by the program or discipline objectives and competencies. Wow, are you confused? Are you taking notes? Let's take a review of these things. To clarify some of this terminology, a competency. This is a broad base of foundational knowledge or skill and attitudes that can be developed through the learning activities in courses and demonstrated through learning objectives. Now, of course, learning objective is what students who complete a particular course should be able to do or show as a result of learning in that course. The learning experience or activity, we could also put assessment in here, is a subset of a learning objective. It's what the student does in the course to help them achieve that overall objective. Here's how it aligns. These concepts build upon one another and are influenced by one another in the following way. The mission is determined by the history of the institution, core values of those who work at the school, the needs of stakeholders such as students, faculty, contributors, and the larger community of local, national, and global practice to which we contribute. Now, a competency, this is determined by the mission and the values embedded in the whole SPHTM curriculum. These are written and developed by the faculty in the school, department, or program. The course learning objectives, these are determined by the competencies chosen for students to develop in the course of the program. These are written by faculty teaching the course and shared with peers for review. The learning experience or activity, we could also say assessment, is determined by the course learning objectives, and these are written by the instructor teaching the class. Okay, so now you should have a sense of where your course fits in the bigger picture. Let's think about what student brains are doing in your course. Time to visit Mr. Bloom. So Bloom and his colleagues proposed in the mid-1950s that knowing could be composed of 6 successive levels arranged in a hierarchy, and these are the first 3. As you're considering the learning objectives, it helps to find a level here that best suits the level of learning in your course. For example, do students just need to know the facts and principles in the course? If so, they'd be at the remembering or understanding level. Do they need to use the facts and principles in real-world situations? If so, they'd be at the level of applying. In writing learning objectives, the key is to answer the question. As a result of learning in this course, the student will be able to, and then follow with a statement that begins with an active verb. In fact, there are appropriate verbs for each level of the taxonomy. I've listed some of them here in sample learning objectives for each of the 3 levels. Let's say that for a particular course, we agreed that students needed to remember previously learned material and maybe also to construct meaning from that material. Okay, so now the job is to write an objective that begins with an active verb, appropriate, for the remembering and or understanding levels of learning. For instance, look up there. Define discipline-specific terms. This is a learning objective appropriate for the remembering level. We can measure this. We can see it. Students who do this have remembered previously learned material. Let's look down a little lower. Interpret charts and graphs. This is an appropriate learning objective for the understanding level, where students need to construct meaning from material. It begins with an active verb. It's measurable. If a student is able to do this, we can infer that the student has learned to construct meaning from the material given. Notice that in both of these examples, define terms and interpret graphs, these suggest an assessment, which would be an activity or opportunity to actually define for themselves and interpret for themselves. Let's look at examples from the other three levels. Again, let's say that in a particular course, a student is learning by breaking down material into parts and examining the interrelation of those parts. An appropriate learning objective for this level of learning would be to analyze the organizational structure of a problem, a situation, a body of literature. Again, this objective begins with an active verb. It can be measured effectively with a quality rubric, and it suggests an assessment, an opportunity for the student to analyze, either verbally or in written format. So if students are evaluating in a course, they're making judgments. An appropriate learning objective for this level would be to, quote, test hypotheses using discipline-specific concepts, or critique commentary on a discipline-specific topic. These objectives suggest an element of inquiry and speculation. Now, the creating level is where students are putting elements together to form new ideas, solutions, products, processes, theories, syntheses. An appropriate objective for this level would be to construct a solution to a public health problem. Imagine, if a student is able to construct a solution to a public health problem, what does that say about what they've learned? If a student is able to design a product based on information given, what does it say about what the student has learned about that information? Have you tried it out yet? Got some ideas for your course? Here are some tips to get you started. So take a look at the taxonomy and think about what students should be doing in your course in order to develop those competencies. Next, use the handout with the different verbs suggested for each level. See if you can find one that demonstrates learning from your course. And use this to state observable behavior you'd see in a student who had learned from your course. Let's look at some more of those verbs together. So each of the sample verbs up here suggests an assessment. If you decide that an appropriate learning objective for your course is that students are able to synthesize the ideas of experts into a set of generalizable principles, then the learning activities must prepare students to do that. And in the assessment must include some type of synthesizing activity. In other words, if you define a learning objective that involves synthesis, it can't be assessed in a multiple choice test, because in such an assessment, the student is not synthesizing necessarily. The student is translating the language used by the test writer and attempting to understand it well enough to select, to identify, or to match in this case. But you can't see inside their mind that they're actually synthesizing and that they use synthesis to guess if they got the correct answer. You can see them synthesize if they're doing an activity from which you can actually see them perform the act of synthesis. Now with that, I'd be very remiss if I didn't point out some commonly used verbs that neither suggest an assessment nor measurable outcome. Resist, resist, resist. Just go ahead and eliminate these verbs from your mind when defining learning objective. Remember, learning objectives are measurable, and we can't measure knowing because we can't see it. We can measure what a student does to show you that he knows, but we can't see knowing until the student actually does something to demonstrate that. And demonstrate an understanding of ... is just plain cheating. Define how students demonstrate that understanding by using an active verb and an observable behavior. And to emphasize, here we have a few examples of well-written and not so well-written learning objectives. Look at the first one. Understand scientific methodology. Well, that isn't a learning objective because we can't measure understanding without a behavior, an observable behavior that demonstrates it. Now, if a student can apply the scientific methodology to test hypotheses, well, then we can see understanding in the student's ability to apply the scientific methodology. We may aspire to understanding, but it's not an observable behavior, so it's just not an objective. It's something else. If you use the word develop, why is this a problem? Well, how would you assess the process of developing with any validity? Well, you'd have to do a pre or a post test at best to demonstrate any change. Even then, it's difficult to define or assess develop. Now, you can define what it is students do to demonstrate that they've developed an ability to, say, draw This is the learning objective. If a student creates drawings using concepts learned in the course, then one can see that the student has certainly developed an ability to draw. Again, in the last row, demonstrating an appreciation for works of art. This is not a measurable objective. However, a student who explains the processes in creating a particular piece of art and its place in art history can certainly demonstrate a level of appreciation. This is not to say that the student enjoyed or liked the particular piece. Through an understanding of artistic process and historic relevance, can demonstrate appreciation. Writing learning objectives at the course level should not be a singular exercise for one instructor. Ideally, a group of instructors who teach courses within a program work together on a consensus for objectives and their assessments. This rubric is helpful in evaluating the effectiveness of an objective statement. Examine what you've jotted down, assuming that you've jotted down an objective or two. First of all, do they begin with an active verb? Are they overarching things that a student would be able to do as a result of learning in a course, but not the task-oriented or more detailed things that students do in the course to achieve the objective? Do the objectives address an expected level of learning in the course, i.e. are they from the taxonomy somewhere? Is their language easy for students to understand? Are they meaningful? Do they align with program or discipline objectives, core competencies in the mission? And finally, do they suggest an assessment? Let's apply this to a few final examples. Look at these statements. Which, if any of them, would be considered a well-written learning objective that begins with an active verb that suggests a level of learning from the taxonomy that is meaningful for students in the world outside the course, and that is an observable demonstration of learning? Why would any of them not work as a learning objective? Take your time. I'm going to leave those as open questions. This concludes a self-paced instruction on learning objective design. If you haven't already, consider your course